Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I never wanted to fight, just trees, silence, and a crumbling cabin in the Oregon woods. But when the HOA queenpin came knocking with fake rules, secret maps, and a smile like a loaded gun, I realized peace had a price, and I wasn't about to give up my land without a war. I never thought owning a patch of land in the Oregon woods would make me a target. When I bought the 12-acre property just outside Forest Pines 2 years ago, I wasn't chasing some off-the-grid fantasy. I wanted peace, trees, the sound of my boots crunching through fallen pine needles instead of honking horns. The place came with a run-down cabin, a collapsed barn, and a gravel path that could barely pass as a driveway. In other words, perfect. I'd spent the last 2 decades as a forestry engineer and the 10 years before that in the military, so I knew how to work with my hands and didn't mind living with splinters and dirt under my nails. The property was legally outside the HOA boundary of the nearby development, Forest Pines Estates, a shiny parade of beige houses, uniform lawns, and cars that all looked leased at the same dealership. That was just fine with me. They had their world. I had mine. The first few months were peaceful. I repaired the roof on the main cabin, cleared the underbrush around the foundation, and planted fruit trees along the southern edge of the clearing. Built a small workshop for my tools. Nothing fancy. I installed a small solar array and a backup generator in the shed. When I had time, I fished in the creek running through the property or sat by the fire pit at night and watched the stars. For once, I didn't owe a damn thing to anyone. The first time I met her, I was chopping firewood. She walked right up the gravel path without so much as a hello. Short, in her mid-50s, wearing a windbreaker with her name embroidered on the chest, Karen Barlow, HOA president, it read, like a threat. She held a leather binder and a stainless steel travel mug in one hand as if she were about to give a TED Talk on suburban domination. "You must be the new owner," she said, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded, keeping my hands on the axe. "I am." She stepped forward like she owned the place. Forest Pines Estates has certain standards we expect residents to maintain. We'll need to talk about your roof color, fence height, and exterior lighting. Oh, and I didn't see your mailbox in the standard design. I let out a short breath through my nose. That's because I'm not in Forest Pines Estates. My property line ends about 50 feet past your main gate. She tilted her head like I was a slow student. That may be what it says on your title, but the community plan includes this area as part of our visual perimeter. We expect cohesion. Right, but what you expect and what you own are 2 different things, I replied. Her smile thinned. You'll find it easier to cooperate, Mr. Miller, Andrew Miller. Well, Mr. Miller, I'm sure we'll speak again. She turned and walked off like she hadn't just tried to claim part of my land with her eyebrows. A week later, I got a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just typed on Forest Pines HOA letterhead. It listed infractions: exterior structure not approved, visible tool shed, grass over 4 inches tall, improper vehicle storage. It ended with a vague warning about escalating enforcement if corrections weren't made. I laughed, tossed it in the fireplace, and moved on with my day. 2 days later, I noticed movement near the southern property line. 2 men in reflective vests were walking through my woods, one of them carrying a tripod-mounted scanner, the other holding a tablet. I stepped outside with my coffee and called out, "Morning, you guys lost?" The one with the scanner looked up. "We're conducting a boundary survey for Forest Pines. It's HOA business." I walked closer past my workbench and toward the brush line. "You've crossed the property line. This is private land." He glanced at his partner, who shrugged. "We were told the HOA has rights to conduct perimeter mapping for future easements." "Easements? Who told you that?" "Our client, Karen Barlow, of course." "You got paperwork? Permits? A warrant? Anything at all?" The one with the tablet looked uncomfortable. No, sir. We're subcontractors." "You're also trespassing." I walked back to my cabin, called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff, and told them I had unauthorized surveyors on my land. They told me a deputy would be out within the hour. I went back outside and leaned on my porch rail with my coffee, watching the 2 men quietly pack up their gear and shuffle back through the trees like raccoons caught in the garbage. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, a tall guy named Monroe I'd spoken to once at the gas station, he took my statement, reviewed my deed copy, and shook his head. They didn't have a warrant or any official order. Just a name and a job slip? Exactly. Well, you're in the right here. I'll log this as trespassing. Let me know if they come back. That night, I stood by the fire pit and watched the flames crackle, my boots in the dirt, a beer in my hand. The quiet was back, but something had shifted. I wasn't just a guy fixing up a cabin anymore. I was a target on someone's checklist, and I had a feeling Karen Barlow wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I walked the property line with a coffee in hand and a new edge in my step. Where those surveyors had stood yesterday, someone had pounded in small orange stakes, about a dozen of them, marking out a curved path from the tree line all the way toward the creek. They weren't mine. I yanked out every last one and tossed them in a pile next to the woodshed. I figured that would be the end of it, a final message to keep off my land. But HOA logic works differently, like a cult, if the cult was obsessed with lawn uniformity and fascist mailbox placement. That afternoon, I found another note. This one was typed, folded neatly, and slid under a rock on my porch. Dear resident, it began, impersonal and smug. As per ongoing community improvement plans, Forest Pines Estates is preparing infrastructure upgrades that may involve temporary access across your property. You are advised to cease obstruction and coordinate with HOA-appointed representatives. Obstruction. My land. Now an obstruction. I rate it twice just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. Apparently, defending private property now counted as impeding community progress. So I took the note, walked into town, and paid a visit to the county registrar's office. The woman behind the counter looked like she'd been working there since the Nixon administration, but she was friendly enough and handed over a folder of official maps and parcel records after 10 minutes of searching. Clear as daylight. My land was outside the HOA boundary. No overlaps, no shared easements, no annexation. It had its own parcel number and survey history dating back to the 1960s. I made copies of everything. Later that week, a friend of mine, Tommy, a local contractor, came by to help me install 2 high-definition security cameras on the property. We mounted one at the front gate and another watching the lower field near the creek, where the surveyors had shown up. I figured if anyone came back, I'd have them on tape before they could touch a pine needle. Tommy squinted toward the road as he tightened the last bolt. You know they're going to keep coming, right? These HOA types, they get drunk off their own rulebooks. I chuckled. Let 'em come. I've got paperwork, I've got video, and I've got a healthy dislike of trespassers. Over the next few days, things got weirder. A neighbor from down the hill, Greg, I think his name was, stopped by. Clean-shaven, shiny belt buckle, polite in that practiced way that always made me suspicious. Hey there, he said with a little wave. Hope I'm not interrupting. Just figured I'd come say hi. I nodded, wiping sawdust from my jeans. You're good. What's up? Well, he said slowly, some of the folks in the estates are a little, concerned. There's talk going around that you're being, non-cooperative. I raised an eyebrow. Uncooperative with what? Karen's vision for a fire lane extension, he said, like he was explaining it to a child. It's for community safety. Right now, emergency access is limited. The plan would cut across the south end of your property just temporarily until the new gate goes in. There's not going to be any new gate, because this isn't their land. Greg scratched his neck. Technically, sure, but it's adjacent. That means you're part of the visual continuity zone. I stared at him. That a real term, or did she just invent it at brunch? He shrugged. Look, man, I'm just passing on the sentiment. Nobody wants drama. Karen's got connections at city planning. She can make things hard. I smiled politely and pointed at the camera. She already is. Greg left with a half-hearted wave. I watched his car disappear around the curve, then went back to work. That night, I reviewed the security footage. Nothing out of the ordinary, just wind in the trees, a deer, a raccoon sniffing my porch, but I had a bad feeling sitting low in my gut, like a storm was forming just past the horizon. The next morning, I opened the Forest Pines community website. Someone had posted a map labeled Proposed Community Expansion Plan. It showed a proposed service road cutting straight through my lower field and a future community garden and fitness path circling the area behind my barn. They'd literally planned a jogging track through my land. I stared at it, blinking. It was subtle. The map wasn't official, just labeled conceptual. But the implication was clear. They were trying to normalize the idea that my property wasn't really mine. It was just available, unspoken, unchallenged. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. You should stop being difficult. This land was supposed to be community access years ago. You're holding everyone back. No name, no threat, exactly. Just pressure, like hands around your throat that weren't quite squeezing yet. The next day, I drove into town again. This time, I walked into the office of Jill Perkins, a sharp-eyed property attorney I'd met through a buddy. I handed her the HOA letter, the maps, the screenshots, and the printout from the registrar's office. She didn't say much, just nodded as she flipped through the pages, occasionally tapping the table with her pen. Do they have any legal basis? I asked. She looked up. None. You're completely outside their jurisdiction, but they're bluffing. If you don't fight back now, they'll escalate. Escalate how? Fake easement claims, fraudulent reports, even go after you through planning or zoning departments. They've done it before. Then I guess I'm not just building fences anymore. She smiled. Good, because they've just declared war. Now we hit back, with documents. By the time I left her office, I had a signed notice of no access intent and a formal cease and desist letter ready to be delivered to the HOA board. It was time to push back. 2 days after Jill sent the cease and desist letter to the HOA, things got quiet. Too quiet. No surveyors, no Greg stopping by with his neighborly concerns, no more letters tucked under rocks. For a moment, I let myself believe the silence meant they'd backed off, that they'd realized they'd crossed a line and would retreat like rational adults. Yeah, I know. I don't know what the hell I was thinking either. It was a Thursday when I saw them again, this time in daylight, in full view of my newly installed front-facing camera. A white SUV with HOA stickers on the rear window idled at the end of my driveway. A man in khakis got out carrying a clipboard. He walked to the property boundary, stood there staring at my gate, and then slowly walked the tree line like he was inspecting a damn fence at a military base. He didn't enter the property, but he didn't have to. I knew what this was. Probing, measuring, waiting for me to blink. I printed out a still from the footage, slapped it on my bulletin board next to the HOA map and all the other crap piling up like war trophies, and added the timestamp in red Sharpie. That night, while reviewing camera feeds, I found something worse. At around 3 in the morning, 2 figures in hoodies crept through the lower field near the barn. One of them had a flashlight. The other held what looked like spray paint or maybe flag markers. They wandered around for about 10 minutes, tagged something near the old irrigation line, and then disappeared into the woods. I called the sheriff's office again. Deputy Monroe came out the next morning and reviewed the footage with me on my laptop. He frowned when we got to the part where the figures marked something in the dirt. They trespassed. No question, he muttered. We can't ID them from this video, though. Too dark. I nodded. But this is targeted. It's not just kids messing around. I'll file it as criminal trespass. You want to press charges if we ID them? Absolutely. He closed the laptop and gave me a tired look. You pissed somebody off, Miller? I laughed. Yeah. She runs the neighborhood Facebook group and thinks I should color coordinate my cabin with her azaleas. He snorted. That explains it. By Sunday, things had escalated again. A man in a navy suit and shiny shoes knocked on my door holding a padded envelope. He introduced himself as Mitchell from a legal consulting group representing the Forest Pines Board. I stared at the envelope. What is this? A notification of dispute resolution process, he said calmly, as if this were a friendly neighborhood bake sale. Under HOA bylaws and Oregon Municipal Code, parties with unresolved territorial issues may be invited to voluntary arbitration prior to formal litigation. Invited by whom? I asked. He didn't blink. By the governing board. I reached out, took the envelope, and promptly dropped it into the burn barrel behind me. You tell Karen that if she wants to come for my land, she better bring more than a mailman with a haircut. He blinked once and left without a word. I emailed Jill the moment he was out of sight. She wrote back 5 minutes later, they're preparing to fabricate a legal claim. Start recording everything. So I did. I mounted 2 more cameras, one facing the road, the other watching the rear access trail near the creek. I kept a written log of every incident, every car, every unfamiliar person, and I saved everything to multiple backups, local, cloud, encrypted offsite. If they were going to come for me, they'd do it over my dead body. And a mountain of documentation. That's when the stranger showed up. Late afternoon, a gray sedan rolled up and parked halfway in the gravel. A man in his 40s got out. Dark slacks, rolled up sleeves, glasses. He didn't approach the house, just stood by the gate and waited. I watched from the porch, one hand resting on the shotgun I kept by the door, just in case. After a minute, he raised his hands. Name's Jason Hill. I'm a board member on the HOA. That got my attention. I stepped down from the porch, but stayed on my side of the gate. Let me guess. Karen sent you to charm me into compliance? He shook his head. Number I came on my own. I saw the letter your attorney sent. I also saw the footage you posted of the survey crew and the trespassers. I narrowed my eyes. You came to apologize? No, he said quietly. I came to tell you that Karen's playing dirty, and not everyone on the board agrees with it. That shut me up for a second. He continued. She's been pushing this idea of a community corridor through your land for over a year. Says it's necessary for emergency response access, community cohesion, blah, blah, blah. Truth is, it's about her husband's development contract. If she can claim your property's part of a shared use zone, he gets to extend infrastructure and collect a fat check from the city for the privilege. I stared at him. Why are you telling me this? He hesitated. Because I didn't sign up for this kind of HOA. I signed up to help manage landscaping disputes and noise complaints. Not this. I'm giving you a heads up. I didn't trust him, but I wasn't stupid either. What's your angle? I asked. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. Map overlay. Internal use only. This is what they've been planning since last summer. Karen called it Phase 2. I took the paper and unfolded it. My property was shaded in faint pink, labeled Community Future Access Overlay Zone. No legal foundation, just implication. Jason cleared his throat. You didn't get it from me. Of course not, I said. He nodded once and walked back to his car. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the map under the yellow glow of the lamp, trying to understand just how deep this was going to go. They weren't just trespassing now. They were preparing for war. So was I. It didn't take long for Karen to realize someone on her little board was leaking, and she didn't take it well. 3 days after Jason gave me the map overlay, I found a bright pink violation notice duct taped to my mailbox post. It looked official, stamped with the Forest Pines HOA seal, but instead of the usual complaints about visual disharmony or non-conforming facade tones, this one accused me of erecting an unauthorized permanent structure that interfered with emergency response routing. They meant my gate. The same gate that had been there since I bought the damn place. I'd replaced the hinges and added a lock. That was it. But according to Karen's latest fantasy version of Oregon Civil Code, I was now endangering lives by not letting her HOA imaginary fire trucks barrel through my property. 2 hours later, I heard tires crunching up my gravel. A patrol cruiser pulled in. Not Monroe this time. Another deputy, a younger guy, looked fresh out of training. He stepped out of the car like he expected me to start throwing rocks. You, Andrew Miller? He asked, hand resting on his belt. I nodded. What's this about? Received a call about potential obstruction of a designated fire corridor. I stared at him. You're kidding. No, sir. The caller said there was a locked gate blocking emergency access for the Forest Pines estates. That gate is on my property. Forest Pines has no legal claim here. I've got the deed. I've got maps. I've got a cease and desist letter on file. You want paperwork? He paused. You mind showing it? I went inside, came back with a folder, handed it over. He flipped through the pages, frowning. Yeah, this looks clear. I'm not seeing anything that gives them right of access. Nope. He handed it back and nodded slowly. Mind if I make a note of your security system too? Just to confirm you're monitoring the perimeter. Go ahead. He scribbled a few things, then looked up. Sorry to bother you, sir. I'll file this as resolved. You get any more of these calls, feel free to reference this report number. After he left, I stood in the driveway for a while, staring at the now wrinkled pink notice, still fluttering on the ground. It wasn't about the gate. It never was. It was about making me jump, react, waste time, energy, money, and it was just getting started. That night, Jill called. They've filed a preliminary civil motion, she said bluntly. It's not a formal lawsuit yet. It's what we call soft pressure. But they're asking the court to review potential grounds for temporary easement enforcement. In English, they're trying to get the judge to green-light a limited-use right-of-way across your land. Once they get a toe in, they'll push for more. It's like letting a raccoon into your attic. Let's set the traps then, she laughed. Already on it. I'll prepare the countersuit this week. They just opened the door for a formal legal response. We'll hit them with trespass, harassment, and abuse of power. I sent her Jason's map, the security footage, the fire corridor letter, and a few choice screenshots from the HOA website, where someone had quietly posted an informal poll asking if residents supported access expansion into adjacent undeveloped land. They meant me. The next blow landed the following weekend. I was stacking lumber behind the workshop when I heard a car pull up. It wasn't a cop this time. It was a white SUV with county planning and code enforcement on the side. Two guys got out. One looked like he'd rather be golfing. The other held a clipboard and tried to smile. "Afternoon," he said. "We're here to follow up on a report. Alleged violation of zoning and building safety ordinances." "From who?" He shrugged. "Anonymous tip. We're required to investigate." He asked about the generator, my workshop structure, even my compost bin. I walked them through it all, showed permits where I had them, clarified zoning details, and politely corrected their assumptions. When they got to the fire safety issue, I handed them a copy of the same county map from the registrar's office. "You see any fire corridor here?" I asked. They both shook their heads. "We'll close the report," the clipboard guy said. "Everything looks compliant. Sorry for the trouble." I was getting used to that phrase, "sorry for the trouble," usually said by people who didn't cause the trouble but were now neck-deep in it because Karen Barlow had a vendetta and a printer. As they drove off, I noticed something new: spray paint. Bright orange lines near my creek, shaped like a square. I hadn't seen them before. That night, I checked the camera logs. Sure enough, two kids, teenagers, had wandered onto my property just before midnight 2 nights earlier, carrying paint cans. No masks, faces clear as day. They walked right up to the waterline, spray-painted the ground, then posed for a selfie. And guess what shirt one of them was wearing? Forest Pines Swim Team. I smiled, paused the footage, and sent it straight to Jill. 2 days later, Monroe came out again. He'd gotten the same footage, along with a printed copy of the HOA social post, encouraging youth community involvement in property identification initiatives. Subtle but damning. He looked tired. "You're building a case here, Miller." "Not just building," I said. "I'm reinforcing it." Before he left, I walked him back to the gate, and he hesitated. "You know they're not going to stop, right? Even when the law's on your side. This isn't about logic. It's about power." I nodded. "Then it's a good thing I don't scare easy." That night, someone egged my house. After the egging, I didn't even bother calling the sheriff. What would I say? Someone scrambled breakfast on my siding. No cameras had caught it. Whoever did it stayed out of the frame. Either that, or they knew where the blind spots were. But I cleaned it off, logged the incident in my ever-growing file, and kept building. Then, like clockwork, came the official summons. Forest Pines HOA, through their lawyers, had filed a civil complaint against me. Obstruction of emergency access, refusal to cooperate with community infrastructure, and denial of public safety improvements. The icing on the insanity cake. They included a claim that I was intentionally misleading officials about property boundaries. They were accusing me of lying about my own deed. Jill, thankfully, was already 2 steps ahead. She'd prepared our counterclaim with meticulous detail. Our response included multiple layers: trespassing, harassment, coordinated defamation, and emotional distress. We attached time-stamped video evidence, GPS-tagged survey data, and 3 notarized documents from the county registrar affirming my land ownership. And the cherry on top, Jason. He'd sent us internal HOA communications. Not all of them, but enough. Meeting transcripts, proposal drafts, and emails. In one thread, Karen had written to another board member, "If we can just prove habitual access to the Miller parcel, it's only a matter of time before the county recognizes implied easement." It worked in Oak Ridge. I'd underlined that line twice. At the preliminary hearing, Karen showed up with a legal team that looked like they were hired for a pharmaceutical class action. She wore a navy suit, carried a clipboard, and smiled like she was headed to a church fundraiser. I wore my boots. Judge Lanning was mid-50s, sharp, and didn't seem interested in bullshit. He listened carefully as their side made their pitch, that the HOA's request was minimal, that I was in conflict with broader safety measures, and that the community consensus supported access across my field. Jill didn't flinch. She stood, crisp blazer, voice calm. "Your Honor, the HOA is not merely asking for access. They've attempted to fabricate a right that does not exist. They've entered my client's land without permission multiple times under false pretenses. They vandalized, surveilled, and harassed, and now they are seeking to use their own misconduct as justification for further violation. She dropped the HOA's own map on the stand, the one Jason had provided. The pink-shaded future access overlay zone glared up from the page like a smoking gun. The judge frowned. Was this part of any county-approved plan? No, Your Honor, Jill said. It's an internal document created by the HOA without authority. The room got very still. Karen leaned in toward her lawyer, whispering furiously. Her face had gone pale. Judge Lanning closed his folder. I see no legal foundation for the petitioner's claims at this time, he said. Any further argument on easement rights will require formal title analysis and verified survey documentation. Until then, I'm granting temporary injunctive relief to the defendant. No further contact or intrusion is permitted by the HOA or its agents. It wasn't a final victory, but it was something solid, a legal line in the sand. Finally, the law had spoken, and it said, "Stay the hell off my land." The next few days were quiet. No more cars, no letters, no teenagers. I dared to hope they'd learned something. That's when I got hit from another angle. Jill called me, sounding half amused, half annoyed. They just filed a report with the zoning department claiming your workshop is an unpermitted structure violating the Wildland Urban Interface Code. I laughed. That's a new one. They're trying to get you on fire hazard violations now. Jesus, is there a bingo card I should be filling out? She didn't laugh. This time, I was ready. When the county inspector came by, I walked him through the entire build. Foundation, spacing, ventilation, even the fire break I'd cut around the structure. I handed him my permits, fire mitigation report, and environmental compliance forms. He blinked. You've got a mitigation report from forestry? I used to work there. I wrote half the code. He chuckled and shook my hand. You're good. Nothing non-compliant here. That would have been the end of it, until the complaints started rolling in again. First, animal control called. They'd received an anonymous tip that I was harboring aggressive dogs. I don't even own a dog. The closest thing to a threat on my property is a squirrel with a bad attitude. Then came a report to the county health department claiming I had improper chemical storage near a waterway. That one triggered a visit from a public safety officer. It became obvious someone was trying to bury me in bureaucracy. None of the reports stuck, but each one cost me time, attention, and sometimes money. Small inspections fees, permit copies, legal responses. I forwarded each incident to Jill. She started building a case not just of harassment, but of coordinated administrative abuse. Then came the turning point. We traced the source of the animal control complaint. The file had metadata in the online submission, a device ID tied to a local IP address. It belonged to Karen's home. When we traced the zoning violation complaint, it matched the same network origin. So did the fire code submission. Jill said it best. She didn't just step in it. She cannonballed. We gathered the data, notarized the digital forensics, and drafted a new addition to our lawsuit: malicious abuse of process, targeted defamation, and fraudulent use of public agencies for private harassment. That was when Jill told me it was time. Now we go on offense. The word Jill used, offense, hit different. Until now, I'd been reacting, countering, defending. But suddenly, we had ammunition, not just rebuttals, evidence, patterns, names, metadata. And I had Jason. We met at a diner 20 minutes outside of town, neutral ground. He wore a baseball cap, low, and a hoodie like he was auditioning for a low-budget spy flick. I brought my laptop, a burner phone, and the manila folder of printed HOA correspondence he'd already leaked to Jill. Karen's getting nervous, he said, stirring his coffee. She called an emergency meeting. Not on the books. No minutes taken. She told us the HOA might face civil exposure if we don't control the narrative. She said that exactly, almost verbatim. I slid him a flash drive. That's everything so far. Complaints, call logs, zoning reports, all traceable back to her house. He winced. This is going to be a mess. She wanted a war. Now she gets one. Jason leaned in. There's more. I couldn't send it by email, too risky, but she forged a vote last year. HOA policy amendments. She claimed 72% approval for an emergency development overlay zone, but only 18 people responded, and 8 of those were duplicates. I blinked. She faked a community vote. She used the results to justify petitioning the county for potential annexation studies, the same ones that put your property on that conceptual jogging path map. I stared at him. You know this makes her legally vulnerable for fraud, right? That's why I'm here. Back home, I reorganized everything. Jill wanted a chronological evidence packet for the civil suit expansion, so I spent the next 3 nights digging into Karen's public records, cross-referencing her business filings, her husband's construction permits, and the HOA's published newsletters. What I found was gold. Karen's husband, Lawrence Barlow, had submitted a commercial proposal to the city's planning commission for a wellness and retreat complex on adjacent land, which just so happened to need expanded access through my parcel for emergency vehicles. So this wasn't just about power, this was about money. Big money. No wonder they wanted me out of the way. I updated the security system, upgraded the cloud storage, installed thermal sensors, and added a backup server at a friend's place across town. I even wired the gate with a pressure switch alarm. Not enough to trap someone, but enough to wake me and alert the camera system. That night, around 1:45 a.m., an alert pinged my phone. Motion detected. Creek perimeter. I opened the feed. There she was. Karen Barlow herself. Not a surveyor. Not a proxy. Not a teenage pawn. She was wearing a hooded windbreaker, flashlight in hand, and dragging what looked like a steel marker rod. She stopped near the painted orange square by the waterline and jabbed the rod into the soil like she was laying a boundary stake. Then she turned to face the trees, speaking to someone behind the camera's view. I zoomed in, lips moving. Another figure emerged, smaller build, long hair, young. Greg's daughter, Katie. She was 16. I didn't even hesitate. Called 911. Told the dispatcher there were 2 people trespassing, damaging property. When Deputy Monroe showed up 20 minutes later, I showed him the live playback. His jaw tightened. That's the HOA president? Yep. He called it in. Another unit arrived. They didn't find Karen or Katie, but they found the rod jammed into the soil, a paper tag attached. It read, FP Access Corridor, Phase 2. They bagged it for evidence. That same morning, I received a letter from Child Protective Services, anonymous concern, claiming I was exposing minors to firearms and hazardous materials. That one knocked the breath out of me. Even though I don't have kids, even though the claim was baseless, it wasn't just about ruining my property anymore. It was about ruining me, my name, my record. I called Jill, told her everything. She was silent for a second. Then, we filed for a temporary restraining order against Karen Barlow immediately. We did. And we attached everything, videos, timestamps, digital trails, property diagrams, and the witness statement from Jason. The judge granted the TRO the next morning. Karen was barred from coming within 500 feet of my land. And that was when the narrative began to shift. For the first time since this whole mess started, the HOA board showed signs of fracture. Jason forwarded me an email thread. 2 other members, Angela Price and Mark Stewart, were questioning Karen's decisions. Mark even used the phrase, possible exposure to personal liability. Then Angela sent an anonymous tip to a local blog that covered rural zoning disputes. The article went viral. HOA president caught trespassing to forge access corridor. The comments were brutal. The story even got picked up by a regional paper. Karen went quiet. For 48 hours, not a single call, letter, or visitor. Then Jason texted me. She's planning a vote. Emergency power transfer. She wants to hand control of the HOA to someone else, temporarily until the heat dies down. I texted back, letter, she's bleeding credibility. And I'm not done yet. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the Forest Pines Clubhouse, an offensively symmetrical building with faux columns, pine-scented air fresheners, and more surveillance cameras than a Vegas casino. Residents were encouraged to attend to discuss an urgent leadership transition, which was HOA speak for Karen's melting throne. I wouldn't have gone. I didn't belong to the HOA. But I'd been subpoenaed as a witness after Jill filed a formal complaint to the county about Karen's abuse of administrative power. So, there I was, boots polished and legal folder in hand, walking into a room full of uncomfortable stares and free Costco cookies. Karen wasn't at the head of the room. Instead, her chair sat empty. Jason stood awkwardly in her place, flipping through papers, sweat gathering at his collar. He nodded when he saw me, but didn't smile. Angela and Mark sat to his left. Neither of them looked thrilled to be there. A few residents were whispering in the back, glancing over at me. I caught snippets like trespassing, restraining order, and, my personal favorite, illegal shed man. That last one almost made me laugh. Jason cleared his throat and began. As you all know, recent events have brought into question the conduct of President Karen Barlow. Effective immediately, she has requested to delegate temporary leadership to Board Vice Chair Angela Price while legal matters are resolved. Angela shifted uncomfortably but nodded. Only under the condition that we initiate an internal review and cooperate fully with county investigators. Some people clapped, others looked stunned, but no one spoke up to defend Karen. Then it was my turn. I was invited, technically allowed, since the board had been forced to acknowledge my property's legal exclusion from the HOA during litigation. I walked to the front, opened my folder, and placed the flash drive on the table in front of Jason. This contains footage, documents, IP metadata, and false agency reports, all traced to Karen's household or HOA devices. It also contains county zoning overlays, showing no legal grounds for any easement across my property. It shows malicious harassment and misuse of authority by your former president. No one spoke, so I added, I didn't want a war. I wanted peace. I wanted to rebuild a cabin and live in the woods, but what Karen did wasn't just illegal. It was predatory, and if your HOA continues on this path, you're all complicit. I turned, walked back to my seat, and let the silence do the rest. The next day, Forest Pines HOA issued a public statement. Due to ongoing investigations, Karen Barlow has formally resigned from the board. We are reviewing recent administrative actions and working with authorities to ensure compliance with county law and ethical governance. Translation: the ship was sinking and everyone was grabbing a lifeboat. That night, Jill called. The county zoning attorney just emailed me. They've frozen all petitions involving your parcel. No development permits will be issued. You're safe. Good, I said. But I'm not finished. We filed the full civil suit the next morning. Trespassing, administrative harassment, malicious misuse of county resources, fraudulent documentation, defamation, and attempted property seizure. It was aggressive. Jill called it a nuclear response. I called it fair. Jason agreed to testify. So did Angela reluctantly. Mark refused, but he sent a statement confirming Karen had overridden multiple procedural votes and pressured members to act outside the HOA charter. Meanwhile, Karen vanished. Her home went dark. No SUVs in the driveway. A "for sale by owner" sign appeared within days, but it kept getting torn down and restaked like some petty tug of war. Rumor had it she'd moved in with her sister in Eugene and was taking a break from public life. Coward. I spent the next week shoring up the perimeter, not out of fear, but habit. Built a proper cedar fence line across the south edge. Added motion-activated lights near the creek. Set up a decoy trail cam with a bright red LED that blinked like a beacon, just to mess with whoever still thought they could sneak in. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was precise. Then came the kicker. Jason emailed me at midnight. Subject line: Karen's last gift. Attached was a photo of an internal HOA memo she'd written weeks earlier but never sent. It detailed a Phase 3 plan to petition the city to rezone adjacent parcels as mixed-use recreation and preservation zones, giving HOA legal authority to request easement paths for community enrichment. It was bold. It was detailed. It named my parcel specifically, and it was never submitted. She knew the heat was coming. I forwarded it to Jill. She replied 3 minutes later, "That's intent. We've got her cold." Now it wasn't just about defending land. It was about exposing the machine behind her. The city opened a review. County officials requested full access to HOA records. And residents, those beige-wrapped, quiet neighbors, started coming to me. Not to apologize, but to ask questions. What did she really plan? Were we in danger of being sued too? What should we do to stop this from happening again? One man, Greg, Katie's father, showed up at my gate with a bottle of scotch and eyes full of guilt. "She dragged my daughter into this," he said. "I didn't know what she was doing until it was too late." I took the bottle, said nothing, let him sit with that silence. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But the queen was off the board, and the pawns were starting to question the game. 3 months later, the land was quiet again. Not just in the usual way. Crickets wind through pine, the occasional snap of a branch under a deer's hoof, but in a deeper, cleaner way. A silence that meant no watchers, no papers tucked under rocks, no headlights slowing as they passed my gate at midnight. The lawsuit settled before it went to trial. Karen agreed to a private mediation under pressure from her own attorney. He'd clearly told her the metadata trail was too strong to fight. She signed off on a full admission of fault for trespass, misuse of administrative process, and submitting false reports to public agencies. Her husband's development contract was quietly revoked by the city after zoning officials launched their own review. She lost everything. They sold their house at a loss. Moved to Idaho, I heard, somewhere with no HOA poetic. The settlement included a sizable payout, not life-changing money, but enough to fund my final rebuild projects, a new well system, a rebuilt barn with proper insulation, and a solar upgrade that made me completely self-sufficient. I donated a portion of it to the county library's legal education fund. Figured if I'd known half this stuff when it started, I might have slept a little easier those first few weeks. Jill called it a quiet victory. I called it earned. Forest Pines HOA was gutted. Angela stepped down citing health reasons. Mark retired from the board. Jason stayed reluctantly, only after residents voted to dissolve the old board entirely and rebuild it from scratch under county supervision. And they rewrote the bylaws. That part shocked me the most. They created a new clause preventing HOA enforcement beyond its legal boundary, explicitly protecting properties like mine. They even sent me a notarized letter acknowledging the unlawful and unethical behavior of former President Barlow. I framed it, hung it in the outhouse. Figured that's where it belonged. Funny thing was, neighbors actually started talking to me, not just with awkward guilt, but curiosity. A couple asked if I'd help them understand their own deeds. One woman, Eliza, offered me homemade bread and asked if I could teach her how to set up trail cameras on her property. She suspected someone was stealing firewood from her shed. Greg came by again too, not with scotch this time, but with Katie. She apologized in person, said she didn't know what she was part of. She'd just been told it was volunteering. I believed her. Greg thanked me for not pressing charges. I told them both the truth. I hadn't fought to ruin anyone's life. I'd fought because this land was mine. Because peace should never require submission. Because being the quiet guy at the edge of the woods doesn't mean you're a pushover. A month after the dust settled, I built something new. Not a gate, not a fence, a bench. Just a simple bench facing the creek. I sit there sometimes with my coffee, watching the light shift through the trees, thinking about how close I came to losing it. Not the land, but the sanity, the stillness, the soul of the place. And sometimes I smile, because I know that somewhere out there, Karen is sitting in a prefabricated ranch-style home with no jurisdiction, no clipboard, no power, and I'm still here, rooted, free, unbroken.